Just a couple of more points, one or two points that Harman makes in sections 3 and 4 of this excerpt. The first is a very interesting one, and one that you can test for yourself on your own moral beliefs. And that is that our moral beliefs do actually, he would say, bear the traces of their conventional origins. That is, we can think of a moral belief that we have and that is widely shared, let's say, with other people. And then we can ask ourselves whether this is the kind of thing that would result from a convention, that is, from mutual bargaining about what we promise to do, about the ways in which we promise to behave. His major example here is the belief right here at the bottom of page 57. He says, in our morality, harming someone is thought to be much worse than not helping someone. That's a misprint that I identified. In our morality, harming someone is thought to be much worse than not helping someone. Now, first, you have to ask yourself whether you believe that that's true or whether you believe that that is a common belief. And then, if you do, you ask yourself, well, is that the kind of thing that would result from people bargaining with each other, from people engaging in some sort of process of hashing out an agreement about how to behave? And he says yes. He says yes. He says, now this general principle about harming and not helping may seem irrational and unmotivated, but it makes sense if we suppose that our moral views derive from a tacit convention that arose among people at different wealth, people of different wealth, status, and power. I mean, think about that. That is, we think that both harming somebody and not helping them are bad, but we think that it's much worse to harm somebody. He says, well, that makes perfect sense if you think about that being a result of a mutual bargaining process between people of great resources and people who don't have great resources. I think if you're a person of great wealth and therefore have all sorts of ability to help people, you would not want those two things to be regarded as equally bad. You would not want, from a self-interested point of view, harming somebody to be of equal moral badness with not helping them, because then you would be obligated to basically give away all your wealth, right? Because people need it. If you're a poor person, you would want those two principles to be regarded as equally bad, because you would stand in more need of help than the rich person. That is, as he says here, on the other hand, the poor and weak might refuse to agree to a principle of non-interference or non-injury unless they also reach some agreement on mutual aid. That is, you would say, well, I'm not going to agree not to harm unless you agree to help. And so you'd have two different bargaining positions. And as he said, we would therefore expect a compromise, right? And that's what we get. That is, we get a compromise in saying, well, they're both bad, but we'll say that harming somebody is worse, okay? And that you have a total obligation not to harm them, but you don't have a total obligation to help them. That would be just one example of looking at a common moral belief and asking yourself whether it's the kind of thing that would result from a convention, that is, parties bargaining about behaviors, acceptable behaviors, and I suppose customs from a position of selfishness, right? Trying to get the best deal. Section 4, I believe the most important idea here is him saying that that morality is essentially social. That he compares it to Kant's idea that morality is the law that you give to yourself, but also to everyone else. And that we're all mutually engaged in that process of self-legislation about morality, but also universal legislation. That, as he says here towards the bottom of the first column on page 59, moralities are social. They are defined by the conventions of groups. But then he points out that we belong to different groups, and this sometimes puts us into difficult positions because different groups have different conventions, and so we can face the familiar dilemma of which convention we feel is more binding on us because they may be incompatible. He also mentions that in good ways and bad ways, we may refuse to agree to the conventions of our society. In a bad way, what if we were, killers? What if, as he says, hardened professional criminals who simply do not acknowledge? And here, maybe we inevitably think of Postman's example of Ted Bundy, the serial killer, that these people simply do not accept the basic conventions that we do. And so we can't say that they're wrong. We can stop them. We can put them in jail. We can even execute them and regard what they do as disgusting. But I suppose, Postman, and this is Postman's point, we can't morally condemn them because they are not subscribing to our conventions. Postman sees that as intolerable. Harman does not. There's also maybe a good way in which we refuse to, or an admirable way in which we refuse to enter into this social contract, you might say, or social convention. All conventions are social because so it's kind of redundant to say social convention. All convention is social. But we can refuse to enter into it, right? And he mentions a pacifist here in the second column on page 59. For example, a pacifist may think that he morally ought not to participate in wars, although he will not make the same judgment about other persons. He will not say that it is wrong of them to participate, although he will certainly think it is bad for everyone that they engage in wars. And there are many other cases in which a person imposes moral obligations and duties on himself without supposing that other persons are similarly obligated. And that's a familiar, I suppose, position to be in, or familiar thought about conscience. That is, someone who's a pacifist may say, I will not participate in a war, without necessarily judging others to be wrong for doing so, just saying that they will not do it because they do not accept that conventional idea that killing in war is acceptable.